is much different than New York City right now. So we've got sun, there's a golf course behind me, so I'm watching some golfers come through and just enjoying the breeze and the nice weather. Vitamin D.
Nice. Let me just check one thing, but I think we got our little live feed kicked on. And today's topic conversation is just basically around this M&A conference that we're putting together, the M&A Science Virtual Summit. I know you had some questions about it, and I roped you into this conference, and figure it'd be easier just to do a quick little stream so that anybody else that wants to learn more about it, we can answer some of those questions.
Yeah, I didn't realize whenever I read your book and reached out to tell you it was a great book that we'd be doing a virtual conference in a few months. So thanks for having me on. And I guess one of the first questions that I have right off the bat, which I'm sure others will, is why M&A virtual conference and why now?
Hey, real quick, so everybody knows, this is Jonathan. How do you say your last name? Shiery?
Shiery.
Shiery. So I've been saying it wrong this whole time.
You have, and I've been too polite to correct it. And part of it is because I never go down the path of correcting anybody. Everybody says it incorrectly because it's spelled wrong. It's spelled Shiery, which is not how you pronounce Shiery. So it's an old family split along the way. So that's kind of the story, and I'll save you the long story.
That's not a good M&A skill to have, by the way.
It was divestiture of the family. Let's put it that way. Along long history.
So Jonathan Shiery with Guidehouse out of New York, who's now hanging out in Florida, and one of our sponsors for our upcoming M&A Science Virtual Summit. So first question was, why are we doing this conference?
Why are we doing it?
So good question. I've hosted the M&A Science podcast for about 4 years now. And in doing this podcast, I've learned a lot from interviewing all these practitioners. And it's cool because in the beginning, I didn't know anything about integration, how that worked. So you really get a good understanding it and realize that there's a lot of interesting challenges in our industry. And one of the biggest ones I see is the fact that it's so siloed off, that you don't really have a go-to platform to share lessons learned, best practices. And I saw this as a big gap in our industry and a problem. And in doing this podcast for 4 years, it grew. We got about 15,000 people following it now. And with doing that, I started expanding and doing some of these podcasts at conferences, which I do it in front of a live audience. But now we can't do that anymore because everything is locked down. So I recently started doing these live podcasts, which has been fun. We got video feed. We don't script this stuff. It's all off the cuff, most of it. And now that that's gone on, the other thing I noticed is all these M&A conferences out there, and you're familiar with most of those platforms, they either canceled their event or postponed it to maybe later this year. And that's why I thought, here's a great opportunity, because I personally think a lot of these platforms could have pivoted and went to a digital delivery model. And for us, since we've already had this natural progression of developing a community of M&A practitioners, why not put together a virtual summit, get everybody together, and make an ambitious goal of making this the best M&A conference in history?
Yeah, I thought it was such a fascinating idea when you were going down the path of bringing it up, and what you've done with the M&A Science podcast has always really intrigued me. And and what I love about where you're going with this conference and what you've done with your podcast is you're opening up the hood and you're moving past some of those big buzzwords out there. And I think that's really important. We're moving into tactical explanations and real industry practitioners discussing how they approach the different aspects of M&A. And that's something that I think is really exciting about this conference. And I know you've brought people together from all types of backgrounds and different industries and quite an impressive list of companies. What are you most excited about as you've seen this come together?
It's kind of like these goals. I've gone to about at least 20 different M&A conferences, and I had a quirks with every little one. There's things I didn't like, whether it was the content, the format, things like that. And this is an opportunity to sort of take all of it, rethink it, reinvent it. And you already know the guidelines where there's no commercial pitches. I mean, all these panels and sessions are 100% focused on delivering lessons learned and best practices. So it's a great group of practitioners that are forward thinking, really trying to eliminate the old school 90s way of doing M&A and getting in the practitioners that are thinking forward about it and that want to see our industry evolve and move forward.
Yeah, and what's great about this conference is that anybody can attend that would like to be part of an M&A conference, that would like to catch up on the latest industry trends. I know you're focusing a lot on modernization. That was a challenge in the traditional model. And as much as I enjoy going to some sunny place in the country and spending a couple of days and getting the network, it becomes a very large expense when you're trying to sponsor and you have large amount of attendees and you're doing the efforts. And in this case, all you have to do is register, link, and show up. And I think you're still going to be able to get a lot of the same type of learnings and insights, and even better because you're going to get people that traditionally couldn't make it be there and comment. So, what are you doing though, like, to try to make sure that you keep the networking aspect, which is always something that I think people are keen to do with conferences? How are you managing that challenge and that overcoming that hurdle?
That's a good question because we were always evaluating this with contrasting experience of having these conferences in person. So part of that reason was, do we want to have registration fee? Do we not? Going back and forth on that. And we subsidize our expenses as much as possible. And you know that we
Yeah.
operate the conference as efficient as possible. And we had an idea. So now registration is completely free. We already have 250 people registered.
Wow.
80% of them are in-house M&A practitioners. And what I want to do is that when I do the welcome remarks, I'm going to tell people, like, instead of spending whatever 500 plus bucks, I want you to take that and make sure you get a good experience. We would have spent $100 a person just for a venue, but why don't you spend $100 and buy something nice for your house? Go get a chrome fruit bowl or something like that. Get your lunch delivered in the finest, wherever the best thing. We're not serving conference chicken today. Go
Yeah.
call the local steakhouse, get something nice delivered. Same thing on into the happy hours and things like that. And then, so that's sort of been the big thing, is thinking about the experience and how can we contrast it. The networking thing, I think a lot of it is going to be being proactive on these panel sessions where we don't have these big 3 or 4 person panels that you've seen with a bunch of speakers. I've really pared it down so it's focused, but at the same time, we're getting some contrast of views in there. And then being able to be active in Q&A, that sort of shows people who you are, because every time I start a session, I always welcome people to introduce themselves. So I think that's a big thing. I think follow up when you see an interesting speaker, reach out to them.
Yeah, and I know just at Guidehouse, where we do a lot of focus on M&A and leader service offering for the financial services area. What I'm excited about is bringing our team to attend and being able to have them listen through the content, but also get to pair up with some industry practitioners. As much as I love consultants because it's the career that I've made of myself, right? I also understand there's a different way that consultants look at the challenges as if you're inside the industry, and being able to pair up and talk about IMO modernization and take some of the conceptual great ideas, pie in the sky thoughts from our own experiences and really understand how that could be applied in industry and turn it into a actual tactical roadmap with somebody that's living and breathing that inside a business. I think is just going to be instrumental and invaluable to move forward. And so that to me is as good at networking as possible. We're getting in the trenches together and we're working on some thoughts and new concepts and applying them and sharing what we think to the crowd and the people that attend.
Tell me more. Tell me, what are the top things you want to learn out of this conference?
Ooh, I mean, there's always, I think, surprise learnings when you're going down these, and if you keep your ears open, I think there's a lot of nuggets that come out of it. One of the biggest things that I would like to learn is, the different industries are always bringing new. Sorry about that. Getting a call midstream, so hopefully that's another M&A call. But one of the things that I find most valuable is looking at other industries and understanding the insights and the way that they're approaching a similar topic. And there are always nuances between, say, financial services or technology or manufacturing. But if you look at a lot of different industries, there's a lot of cross-pollination. And so Lean and Six Sigma, that all came from the manufacturing. So there's a lot of principles that we'll be able to apply. So I'm looking forward to seeing the modernization aspect, the new principles out there, the new techniques, Also trying to understand the technology aspect, especially in financial services, because that's become critical in any type of acquisition or divestiture, or even when you're buying portfolios, understanding how that data is going to integrate with your technology. And I know you've brought a lot of technology players to it. So those are like some of the key highlights. And I'm really interested in some of the integration approaches. I know I'm going to get a chance to speak with somebody on the panel around the 21 dimensions of culture, which we've been studying closely, and just learning about what they've found within those dimensions that has worked, what hasn't worked, and open up the hood, getting past the buzzwords, and really getting into some tactical, like, this is something that you can take out to somebody's and really apply tomorrow and make it work. So
That is our goal, is we want to make sure attendees walk away with both strategic and tactical takeaways they can apply to their own practice. Hence the
yeah,
whole perfect your M&A practice.
Yeah, and I like the idea. Like, one of the things I've found you doing with M&A Science, and even the podcast that we did on culture a while back, is you do a nice job of building a community. And what I'm seeing starting to come together, even if you go to your registration site, is a community. I know you're focused on that, and even the learnings that I get there, I like the idea that it's going to be an area where we have a network now that we can reach out to and bounce ideas and thoughts and lessons, and I think that's critical. And you want to say that you get that in the in-person, but a lot of times you go to these in-person conferences and you'll talk to the people you already know. Maybe you bump into one or two people in the sessions. I think in this case, since we're already virtual, we'll be very used to communicating across that virtual channels. So that'll allow us to feel more comfortable reaching out, after the conference, which I think is going to be some of the most critical part of, your capabilities coming out of these conferences.
That's true.
Yeah.
Things are changing quick, so this is part of that.
And,
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you, like, so, we're about a month away now, and, you've really put things together. What areas are you most excited about right now, now that I've kind of rambled on about where I'm looking at?
Well, so you touched on a couple things. You touched on surprises. You touched on all these different new modern practices, including stuff integration. You point out a lot of tech companies in this conference. I want to clarify that, because somebody mentioned that, oh, this is a tech M&A. It's not a tech M&A conference. The reason why there's a lot of practitioners from the tech industry is, if you look at the companies they're from, Microsoft, Google, Cisco, they're some of the largest acquirers. So hence they have a more mature M&A process. And partly too, we're seeing that these companies are pulling in things from their engineering culture. A lot of these agile lean techniques and approaches are finding their way into the M&A process and really modernizing and evolving that. And that's interesting. And that's where I see, not so much that we intentionally went to make this or pulling all the practitioners from the tech companies, but we're just sort of seeing this natural progression. And then for us is to take a lot of these lessons learned. And you gave an example. There's a lot of things you can learn from one industry and pull into another. Obviously, these companies have learned a lot from the technology business that they operate, and they've applied it to M&A. And a lot of those lessons can be applied in every other vertical doing M&A as well. So I think you're going to see a big theme around that, where here's a lot of these things that stemmed from the software world or technology space that solved a lot of complexities that required the enablement of agility, now being applied to M&A. I think another thing we're going to see is a big trend is, we always think about corporate development and integration as these two distinct, separate roles, but more and more they're really converging together and becoming one. But I think that's going to be a big common theme you see, especially how companies are rethinking integration from the very beginning, where before corporate development would develop an investment thesis based on these set value drivers. And by the time it hits corporate, the integration folks are like, what the hell are these guys thinking? We're never going to hit these goals. And then things fizzle out. And that's why we have this big failure rate. But now we're seeing integration folks involved early in the process. They're actually validating these value drivers. They're getting that commitment that they can actually deliver on them, putting some sense of reality there. And we're seeing them involved even earlier with that management team, even sometimes before the LOI signed, and start laying out what that vision of integration looks like. How are we going to put this go-to-market plan and develop it together. So there's some really good talks around that.
Yeah.
I think those are big ones where there's a lot of theme around collaboration. At the end of the day, this is people oriented, and it's one of the largest magnitude of change management in corporate environment. So a lot of trends are coming around collaboration that also ties into some of those things in the tech area.
I think you made a good point on the technology, and you mentioned the tech M&A. And I think when anybody sees a company, say Google or Microsoft, and they say, "Oh, that's a technology company," and they are, like, that's true. But at the end of the day, they're a business, right? And every business has a model, and the model is people, processes, and technology. And so they have corporate functions, they have legal, they have HR, they have compliance, and they may have a different set of roles than, say, a financial services company has to comply with, and maybe not as much at times, maybe sometimes more, depending on the types of roles that there are. You'd still need to integrate all of those, right? Like, it's a business model. When you're acquiring, you got to make decisions. Do we keep that new business by itself? Do we let it continue to mature outside the ecosystem, or do we integrate it fully? Do we impact their culture? Do we not? Do we bring their processes? Do we onboard their data? Do we want to use any of their technology, or do we just want their data, their customers? And so that's the same questions that we go through in financial services, and I think that that's a key aspect, that to look past those nuances of differences and really focus on that 95% of commonality, which is you're integrating two business models, and I think there's a lot of learnings that you can take across industry when you look at it that way.
I'm glad you see it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I've been excited, and I certainly can't wait to have the opportunity to learn and listen from the others. And I think we would be probably remiss if we didn't at least acknowledge it. I know you and I have a love-hate relationship with the coronavirus and COVID and the impact. And there's more than enough articles and material out there about the impact on business. But it will be interesting, I think, in some aspects, and I'm kind of interested to see if you think the same. But the way that people bring that up or frame it up, and you mentioned collaboration. I think collaboration is an important thing because people are going to be working more remotely. At least that's the thought of today due to COVID. So it'll be really interesting to see where people sprinkle in the impacts of that, or even the acceleration of the modernizing of an IMO. So, have you put any thoughts in that area, or what's your kind of thinking there?
So I'm only doing a couple talks, right? So we have moderators for most of these talks, and we didn't just get any moderator, Jonathan. I don't know this. I think we basically, out of the 10 moderators we have, every single one is an M&A practitioner.
That's fantastic.
We don't have Wall Street or Bloomberg, journalists doing our panel moderation. We got actual practitioners that have a number of years of experience that can really dive deep into these specific topics. The big thing I've heard, especially from the larger serial acquirers, they're still doing deals in this climate. They're still doing deals. They're doing diligence and they're integrating companies. But what's going to be interesting is listening to how they've changed their approach to really adopt, and they're still doing it. They're still going through. And so you're really getting this information and how companies are virtualizing their M&A process as they're doing it. So I think that's probably one of the most interesting parts, is sort of not just like COVID in general impacting, but really more the tactical approaches that are changing with these companies. How do you integrate a company when people can't even go to their office?
Yeah, and it's interesting you're saying that, Kison, because we're hearing the same thing. The deals may change. It may move from in some cases a growth strategy to you're buying distressed assets, and so you're doing small deals, or you're doing acquisitions of divestitures of a company that might be breaking up. When you did and I thought it was really fascinating, the questionnaire you sent all of us, and asking what we wanted out of the conference, and I thought that was thoughtful. Like, what other responses did you hear? What were others really focused on trying to get out of this conference, and areas that they wanted to make points on?
There's a lot of different ones. Everybody had different views. I think partly sort of the role they are on, because we intentionally designed it to cover end to end, from the early strategy part all the way through integration. But a lot of interesting variances in terms of what people are filling out on the registration form about what they wanted to learn. I think there was probably a good emphasis around the COVID aspect of it, and how companies are responding, what the outlook look like, what return to normal looks like, things around that.
Yeah.
I think the greater lessons is going to be how do you adopt, because some of the stuff are permanent changes. And we got to be conscious about that and really look into what are the initiatives to start fueling innovation around our process and making things more effective. This talk I just did earlier with Tracy Levine, it was a good example of that, where really she's talking a lot of ways of using AI tools to assess the people and pretty much predict who's staying and who's going off of
Oh,
data.
wow.
So really
Yeah.
interesting views there as well.
And what type of data did she mention that she uses for that?
She's a handful of tools. There's a lot of
Yeah.
tools. She's pretty agnostic, and it depends if you're looking and picking up stuff that's public, more like the LinkedIn and Glassdoor data. Then there's some other tools that aggregates things, but then there's also internal data. For example, if you got something that's plugging into Slack and things like that, you start really putting a lot of these different pieces together.
I love that tools like that are coming out, and that's another area that I'm excited to hear from others that are in the trenches, learning and figuring out what's out there as far as opportunities. And I know I'd be remiss again if we didn't mention your software technology, which is setting up the collaboration from the front to through the actual integration and making sure that people are sharing documents, and that was always a challenge, right? Like spreadsheets everywhere. Different versions. You had people confused, getting information that wasn't up to date, not sure who's needs to be approved. And I don't know if you want to make a mention around what your technology does and how that kind of fits into this whole M&A area, because I think that's like step one, and I've that was what attracted me all the first step, and then I read your book, and I've been a big fan of you all since that. So maybe you can give a few highlights on your technology and where that's changed and disrupted the traditional process.
Well, we started the business model because we saw an opportunity with technology at M&A. There wasn't a lot out there. There's just a handful of big virtual data room players that were basically just ripping everyone off on their per page pricing models. And we saw, wow, there's a lot of margins, a lot of opportunity in there, a lot of room to make improvement. So essentially, we started Deal Room in 2012 with the thesis that the billion-dollar deals wouldn't be managed in Excel forever, and came in with the mindset we're going to develop a project management tool as an alternative to the traditional virtual data room because the process flow is missing. And that's the critical part of managing an M&A process, is how you manage the actual workflow, which previously was always done on email and a series of Excel sheets. But as much as I like to hype up the technology and sort of push people in that direction, I noticed there's a greater concern than that, where we get a lot of interest, inbound leads that approach to us. And I always notice that a lot of companies look at a tool as a solution, that this tool is going to magically solve our problems and challenges. And a lot of times it's not really where they need to start. I think it goes back further, and we're going to see a lot of that on these talks at this conference, where it's more about the methodology. What is your actual project management approach to M&A? And a lot of companies don't have that defined. And you looked at the book I talked about, it's not talking about why you need to buy a tool. That comes last. You need to really clearly define, and we talk about a game plan, which is something I learned from Atlassian. So shout out to Christina Amiri, who really has taught me about that and helped me build that book I was working on into more of a framework model, but to encourage companies to develop a game plan which defines their operating model. How do your teams work together? How are they sharing information? How are they conducting meetings? How are they managing dependencies? All these little factors I've seen time after time are not clearly defined in organizations. They rely on the playbook, which is a good starting point, but it's a stagnant list of items to check off. It doesn't really define your teams. Think about sports, right? I think we both are in a sports to level. Your daughter, she's doing what, jujitsu?
She's doing jujitsu, tennis, dancing. So she's got a few activities going on, but yes, jujitsu is one of them.
My daughter's a hockey player. So imagine if you gave her a checklist and said, hey, this is how you do jujitsu. Versus if you think about it, it's really training around techniques and a practice that you develop around utilizing those techniques. And that's where I think M&A is missing. We don't have that real discipline that these are specific techniques that you apply in different circumstances and situations. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the goal with the book, was originally focused on the project management piece. But since publishing it, I've had at least 3 practitioners come up to me and said, hey, I want to take what you did. I want to add some additional plays. I want to add some plays for HR. I want to add some plays for leadership. Great. By all means, extend it. I'll give you the credit for it. But that I think is what's missing and should come prior, is really developing that practice, that methodology, and then utilizing a tool to standardize it. Because once you clearly understand that and you actually know what challenges you're dealing with, what problems you need to solve, you have an approach to overcome them, then you could look at tools to really help you standardize that approach and enhance it. But you got to do all that front end stuff. And it doesn't take much. I mean, a lot of times it's just asking the right questions.
Yeah, and you hit a word that is out there everywhere, the M&A playbook, right? You can Google that and you'll have everybody and their brother have a website that says, hey, come get our playbook, right? And I think one of the things that you've tried to change in the thought process is the playbook is not necessarily in itself a useful tool to have a 400 page, here's everything that you do, step by step, because each situation is a little bit differently. Maybe you can highlight, because that's something I've always thought was really interesting, but why the playbook to you is something that needs to be modernized, and how you've looked at the playbook, like, and taken out the useful aspects of it, which you mentioned, techniques, and kind of got away from some of the script, step by step, here's end to end, very strict standard stuff that overwhelms people, and quite frankly is maybe not valuable.
That's a good question. I spent 10 years doing M&A, small deals, right? But nevertheless, similar challenges. And when I started Deal Room and worked closely in the first 3 years with our engineering team, I was really interested by the way they actually project manage the process of building software. And they would use these techniques, and they'd always refer to different agile processes, whether Scrum, Kanban, whatever different agile methodology. But within it were these pretty essential techniques and principles that piqued my interest. They were designed to respond to unpredicted changes. And I just saw this commonality with the approach overcoming very similar challenges that we deal with in M&A. We cannot build a plan to execute an M&A deal A through Z and just go out and execute it. That it doesn't work that way, because there's so many variables that come up. There's so many things. There's always somebody comes across a finding and we got to respond to it. Or maybe there's a new opportunity within the deal. And sometimes we're so busy looking for the risks, we don't even identify these additional opportunities that we could incorporate into our plan. So that's why I really like the model where software developers that follow an agile approach, they have an approach that's designed to focus on responding to changes as opposed to following the plan. So now they're iterating quickly. They're getting new requirements come in, they change a plan on the fly, and the model's designed to do that. And that's why I think M&A needs to have a similar model. So when working with that team, I always saw the connection there, and I just started blogging about it. I thought, hey, this is a pretty cool idea. Blogged about it. Nobody really watched it or paid attention. And then when I started the podcast, I remember interviewing Google and Atlassian, and that's what really gave me this high level of confidence in seeing companies that were actually using these agile principles and practices stemming from their engineering culture, and realizing they're doing it with great success. Most of the people I was interviewing actually came from other corp dev teams that followed a traditional model. So they were able to even contrast the difference between following a traditional approach to M&A versus an agile based approach in the company they were at. And that's where I knew that, hey, this is going to be big. This is where the industry is going to shift and really start adopting these, because they have such a high level of value to add into the process. And that's what really prompted putting the book together and moving on with the model that we've been working on.
Yeah, and since you led with jujitsu, and that gave me an opening to continue to talk about it. I love the analogy that you used there, and in jujitsu, might get a high five from some of my friends and family that are into it. But every move has a counter move, right? And so when you're going through M&A, there's a very similar principle. You do a technique, or you go down to try to integrate, say, people, and you're trying to integrate a department. You're going to learn things that come up, and I used the word surprises earlier. Like, there's always surprises, right? And so you learn a surprise, and you need to be able to have the move or the counter move to be able to navigate that, to prevent it from disrupting the ultimate goal, which is achieving whatever value driver that you had there to start that integration in the first spot. And so I love like how you've looked at that and said, okay, well, we just can't plan for everything because you don't know what you don't know yet, right? And so maybe one of the things that would be really interesting is if you could talk about one or two techniques that you've seen that have been discussed that are focused on the agile, as you went through that learning lesson with the book and the whole modernization of M&A.
Yeah, you're making me think of big shout out to Toby Tester, who actually wrote the foreword for the book.
Go Toby.
And
I've been following Toby on LinkedIn for a while. I love his stuff. So
he does write some great posts.
Yes.
I like his view because now we see like the big Bain report that always puts a big emphasis on scale versus scope deals, right? Which is a real thing. People would acquire a company as an opportunity to increase capability and really, prevent that sort of disruption, right? Because nobody wants to get disrupted by a technology. Nobody wants to fall victim to an Airbnb or Uber type of company. So that's why companies, you can proactively acquire that company early, bring in the capabilities into your organization and integrate it in. He has a really interesting point because the traditional model and approach doesn't really work if you're trying to build this detailed integration plan and you're integrating this company and you end up destroying the very value that you purchased it for, which is the people, the way they do things. And the idea is that with agile, and just taking one example of the whole ability to create a plan but constantly change your priorities. So a backlog is one technique where usually you have an Excel list and you start tagging items as high priority. Half the list is tagged high priority. Then it goes beyond that and you just declare priority bankruptcy and just start all over again. But when you follow a backlog approach, all your lists are always in descending order of priority. So you may periodically groom that list. You may have a meeting with another lead and go through and just make sure it's a descending order. So it's clear visibility across the team. That's the number one most important item. That's number two, and so forth. I think that's a good example of something. One, I know Google, when I interviewed James Harris, they apply it in their diligence process. And that's how they get through their diligence process quickly. They're not worried about the whole 300 item list, but these are the top 10 we need to get done today. And then those get answered. Tomorrow's a new top 10, but are they sort of iterating on the most critical things? Or, are they emerging on the next ones as well? So it keeps that real clear focus continuously through the deal. And we're not waiting these long batches of items that take a whole week to get back and forth. So you got this real faster. I think when it comes to integrating companies, and especially when you're acquiring a company for that capability, it's really similar because you want to constantly be able to change your plan according to the new information that you're getting about this company. And you're learning about it. You're learning about these unique things. You're learning about what's potentially going to disrupt that company. Because there's certain policies and procedures that you have that probably aren't going to go well with this young company full of millennials. You start talking about taking away PTO and maybe that clears out 20% of the people. But knowing that, hey, this is where the reaction is going to happen. We need to change our plan and iterate really quickly. I think beyond that too, there's a lot of value opportunity that you don't find out until those later stages. But a lot of times people just push forward with the plan instead of iterating on that plan to start pulling more value out of it. So I'm actually working on a talk. Toby's leading it. But it's called PMI, post-merger innovation. So don't just integrate, innovate.
Okay. And what's the kind of key areas that you're going to be focusing on within that talk?
Gotta ask Toby. I don't know. I'm the last one to know.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll look forward to speaking with Toby and being part of the session and listen to it. So I'm sure there's going to be some good stuff.
Yeah, I get the idea. The idea makes a lot of sense where we're not just integrating the company, but the innovation is that approach that you have that mindset where you're constantly looking through and your ambition. I think Atlassian has a really good model. I really feel like they got a good sort of poster child approach when it comes to integration because they're aligning around these go-to-markets, which is like, here's a clear vision of where we want to go. And they're constantly building together with that. So it'd be good to actually hear that session from Atlassian around that as well.
And it takes, I think, a certain mindset to be able to manage that. And it'll be really interesting to hear, because one of the things that you're bringing together are, and I like to consider myself in that bucket, probably on the lower end. I'll just, I think I've done it quite a bit, and I feel like I have a lot to bring. But like, you call it M&A expert, right? And we all like to, consider ourselves that have spent our careers in M&A experts, and so you bring in together a lot of people that have spent a lot of time in this area. And the one thing, though, that experts get a knock on is that they're not able to change their view. And if you look at all of the different types of areas where innovation has happened along the way and experts were proven wrong, it's a lot of times because somebody came in saying, you know what, I just don't know this industry. Let me learn it. And as you learn, I think would be, unless you've become this kind of a self-proclaimed expert where you feel like everything you say is the law, and it's a physics rule versus a chemistry where there's exceptions. I think people that are trying to learn are saying, okay, well, I learned this information. I'm not an expert, so I'm more humble. I'll figure out how to learn on it and build off of it. And I think that one of the things that's interesting is you're bringing a lot of people that are experts, but they all seem to be really open to new concepts and ideas. And so in some ways, you're actually bringing together a new kind of definition or a new trend of experts that say, yes, we do know this stuff. We've lived it. We have scars. We've seen the bad, the ugly. We've seen good, but we also understand that it can be done better. And we're willing to get past our own bias and move into like, let's look at the realm of possibility if we deploy these new practices.
You're right. I mean, this is a group of forward-thinking practitioners. I noticed too on signups, there's a lot of people that registered that are relatively new to M&A. They may have been in a business unit, in a management operations role, and then somehow they get lured into the corp dev team or an integration role. I've noticed there's
Yes.
quite a few, so they have this learning curve ahead of them, and they're hungry to learn. And if you think about it, there's not too many platforms out there to really learn this stuff, especially from another practitioner's experience. The schools with the textbook training, you could get some basis there, but it's just like that crash course. You could sit through a week, and by the time you're done, you forget a lot about it. You don't really get that practical knowledge. And at the end of the day, you need resources. I need, when I come across a problem on one of these fin services deal, or I want your opinion on it from some of your past experiences, because I know you worked on some interesting things. I need to be able to connect with somebody and just ask
Right.
them more of that situational challenge of problem.
Well, it goes back to your point, I think, Kison, where you mentioned that, hey, if somebody gives you a checklist of things to do you still know how to do them? Like, or can you actually apply the techniques, and you need to understand the techniques. And with the internet and the modernization and the millie of information, there's the how-to videos. But I think this is going to be a great forum of how-tos based on people out there living and breathing this stuff, and it'll be great to see. How long is the conference, and maybe the date? I don't think we've even mentioned that yet.
Okay, so M&A Science Virtual Summit, June 10th, June 11th, all day events. We got a greatest group of practitioners out there from all the major companies: Microsoft, Google, Atlassian, we got BMO, got Caterpillar. We got a lot of different companies.
There's a good
Uh,
roster.
and you know what I'm looking forward to the most? Happy
Tell
hour.
me. Happy hour.
We
So
got
what's going on with happy hour? You've been talking about this happy hour. We've shared some emails. Like, what is going on with happy hour, and how did you manage to do a virtual happy hour?
I've been telling people we're going to make a better happy hour than an actual in-person conference. It's going to be more fun.
Yeah.
So we're going to have two. We're going to have one each day.
Okay.
The first one, we hired and you know this, we hired a stand-up comedian. So
I do know this, but I have to ask the question because not everybody knows that I know this. So that's where we're going.
We haven't even met him yet, so you haven't even talked to him.
Yes.
We have a stand-up comedian to kick off our first happy hour, and we're going to sort of seg that into a conversation around M&A's biggest mistakes, right? Biggest challenges, biggest mistakes. So it'll be sort of a group discussion around that. And then it'll be fun. We'll be hanging out, drink whatever you want. Part of that sort of free registration is go get yourself a bottle of anything you want. And so that's sort of the theme on the first one. The second one, we're switching up. We're doing an M&A stories, M&A war stories theme. And are you familiar with Chatham House rules?
I am really familiar with Chatham House rules. I had a boss at one point from the UK, and we did a lot of roundtables. And so part of our roundtables for the industry were Chatham House rules.
Okay, this is I just recently learned it. So if you wouldn't mind explaining it to anybody watching, what exactly is Chatham House rules?
Yeah, so I think in the most simplest form, Chatham House rules is, don't say anything you're not supposed to, basically, right? And what goes on in the room doesn't leave the room, and it's a very kind of, focus on the topic, don't leave the topic. That's the kind of way we approached it, because we were dealing with areas where people were sharing information across the industry, and so they weren't able to actually communicate certain information that would be considered competitive advantage, collaboration, but we were able to share other information that isn't considered that would be along the compliance rules. And so it was very focused on, focus on the topic, and make sure you share what you're able to share with that topic.
Yeah, that's very similar to what I learned. It's basically you can learn and use the information, but you cannot disclose where you learned it from. So we're going to have a war stories theme, which ties into my podcast interview. I always ask, what's the craziest things you've seen in M&A, which leads to a lot of these deal war stories. And we're going to build a whole theme. I got both the M&A leads from Flex that are going to be involved. They got an extensive deal experience, and I'm inviting a lot of senior M&A practitioners to be able to join in that conversation. So we'll have a storytelling themed happy hour.
That'll be good. Maybe we'll have to have some type of voting on who has the best story, and they get a cheers at the end.
I like that idea.
Yeah, that'll be good.
Cheers. We'll send them something.
Yeah. So you mentioned so we're gonna have a comedian.
Yep.
That's pretty neat. That's kind of a unique aspect onto a conference.
He's an ex Goldman Sachs banker. So, we're going to keep it industry themed for sure.
What's going on over there at Goldman Sachs? They produce DJs and comedians, I guess, as well, right? The CEO is a DJ.
That's what happens when you go to Goldman.
Yeah, I tell you what, they're having some fun over there. That's pretty neat. So he's an ex-baker. Is he a full-time he's a comedian now, and he's coming in, and he's gonna give us some M&A jokes and keep the conversation light.
I saw one of his highlights on LinkedIn, and I thought, this is good. I actually like this, and I appreciate it. And I reached out to him and told Anish, hey, we're doing this event. Love to get you involved, and it worked out.
Yeah. What other parts of the conference do you think that anybody listening that would be interested in knowing more should look into, or that you're excited about?
All the sessions are good by design.
No.
We did not waste any effort. None of our speakers are paid, so they're all doing this at their own will. And there's none of the sponsors. You guys are taking care of our happy hour, but
that's right.
It's not like commercials. You know what I mean? We're not doing this where there's a hidden agenda and we're sort of pushing all these underlying services or anything. It's just good quality content. So anybody listening could go to the website, mascience.com, and just be able to see through the list of those sessions. We got our agenda updated.
Yeah, I think that's an important point that you just made. One of the things in some type of traditional conferences, and some of them end up going down the path of being commercials. And listen, I'm probably at fault of myself. Sometimes I'm a consultant. I love to tell about our story, and I think we have a great one. But I think one of the areas that I've been so impressed by the way you approach this is really focusing on bringing content and subject matters and collaboration that really is impactful. And it goes without saying that you've done that. You've put your own money where your mouth is, and you've made your own investments into this and made it so that it's something that's free, and you haven't once, pounded your chest about it. So I want to thank you for even running with this idea, because there's a lot of people that probably wouldn't have went down that path. And so you've kind of led the charge in that aspect. And I think you found that we're all willing to jump in the trenches behind you and get into this, and we're all passionate about the topic. And so I thought that was a fantastic way. And I think that really makes the conference like this different than some others that might be out there that people have attended.
They say education is the new marketing.
That is what they say. And then, the area is really being able to execute on it, right? With back to the jiu-jitsu, I watch those how-to videos, and my goodness, so you think they make it look simple until you go to try something. And same thing with M&A. It always looks simple until you start going down the path.
I agree. I agree. Sorry,
So
go ahead.
Kison, no, Kison. So what next? What can people expect between here and the conference?
Well, I got the live series I'm doing every week, either Wednesday or Thursday. We switched it up today and had it on a Wednesday. So we'll continue doing those and have the event keep things going. I think
Yeah.
it's just a good opportunity. I'm really interested in sort of finding other areas to create value for the community. I'm a big believer in demonstrating value upfront without a commitment. And I think that's a good way to sort of put a forward approach in developing a relationship and demonstrating what you're actually capable of. I'm really interested because I've connected with a lot of people, and I feel like there's a lot of people that could connect with each other. Even just looking at a registration list, I mean, this is essentially the M&A community that's driving it, and I'm really interested in just finding additional ways to sort of create value. It's difficult sometimes to really know each person individually to make the thoughtful introduction, which I think is one of the most valuable gifts you can give in business. But there's some other things. I mean, we're in this sort of turn right now where there's a lot of people looking for opportunities, a lot of people that had been laid off, in the past month. I've at least talked to 20, 30 people.
Right.
And, I'm even playing around with some ideas around that maybe we could tie into this conference, but even think about putting a little area where active corp dev teams, obviously the cash flow positive ones, can post some of the gigs, which may be a little bit more disruptive on the traditional consulting model.
Well, what we do is we try to continue to evolve as well. So there's where there's new changes and disruption, there's opportunities, and so that's the game that we all play, right?
That's the right mindset to have. I 100% agree.
Well, if you don't like change, M&A is probably not the place that most people would be comfortable.
Very true.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
maybe we should kind of summarize some closing notes and, in terms of the conference.
Yeah, I think from my end, I'm very excited to be part of it. So again, thank you for even considering me. I wouldn't have thought that would be something that would be running down this path, but also wouldn't have thought 2020 wouldn't be going the way it's went either whenever we first met. But at the end of the day, it's very excited about the content, but and the ability to discuss my own lessons and work with my comrades and my partners on delivering the formats that we're doing, which is the culture and the IMO modernization. But most importantly, I'm really excited to be part of the community and get to know what others are seeing and doing and listening to the sessions. Really excited to be part of something that's innovative, that's disruptive in a good way, that's providing education and real tactical lessons out to the larger group versus just a small subset of people that can attend. And so knowledge is power, and the more that we spread this knowledge and these learnings, the more likely we're going to find them being used and understood, which is important. So that's kind of where I'm excited about, and I can't say that I won't be working on my own war stories to try to keep up with the pace when our Chatham rules get into effect. But that's where I'm at. How about you?
My ambitious goal is to build the world's greatest M&A conference in history.
In history.
And I know it sounds ambitious, despite the fact we're going through a downturn, despite the fact we can't do this in person. But now's the time to really innovate, think forward, and come out of this much further ahead than when we went in. And there's two things that we're going to do to make that happen. The first one is to create the best content that really extracts some real lessons, techniques, and tips that practitioners can really learn and incorporate into their own practice. And the second thing we need to do is to make the event fun and engaging. So those are our top two priorities to make this the best M&A conference in history.
I like it. Well, I'm glad to be part of it, and one day I'll be able to tell my daughter I was part of the best M&A conference in history. So see you on June 10th, I guess.
Hey, we got the proof, the lineup.
The lineup's incredible. The lineup's incredible. Wait, you mentioned there, the different companies. What are the type of roles that you have, just as we wrap up, that are showing? So if you're out here listening and you're wondering if this is a type of conference for you, I think what's impressive is you brought us all together.
Well, objectively, I wanted to bring together the best practitioners. So I don't care if you're corporate development, I don't care if you're integration, whatever it is. I wanted to bring together the very best. I wanted to bring together the best moderators. And then we had a standard, Jonathan. That standard was me. You have to be able to interview better than me. So you're only going to see practitioners that can get into those second and third level deep questions that really extract those lessons. And those are the big things. The third thing is we're going to have some fun. We're going to have our 2 happy hour events, and we're going to make those a good time as well for everybody to remember.
Wonderful. Well, Kison, thanks so much for inviting me. Thanks for having me on this to ask some questions. And I can't wait to see you all on June 10th and talking some mergers and acquisitions and learning together.
Hey, I appreciate it. Thanks for your time, Jonathan.
All right, brother. I'll talk to you soon.